Great. Thank you everyone for coming along to the Lightning Component session that we're doing here, which is a hands-on workshop, as we'll get to in a minute, but I can see not everyone's got a laptop, we'll work around that in a second. It's called Chuck Norris Your Contacts, which was the first Lightning Component I ever wrote, about a year ago now when I had to learn the technology, and I developed this session to help other people write their first Lightning Component, which are now becoming quite a common technology in Salesforce. So here we go, yeah, we're going to whiz through some slides in like 5-10 minutes, and then we've got a bunch of workbooks, exercise books, homework as well. And you can all do that, and we're going to work through the actual component with you. So that's the format, and then we'll try and break first so we can get to lunch before everyone else, but that depends how fast we go. So my name is Simon Lawrence. Obviously I'm English from Bristol in the southwest, where I work for a small company called Design It. We're an IT consultancy. We just do client projects and implementations for all sorts of different people. I'm also a Salesforce MVP. You've seen a load of us walking around today, and Erica gave us a cool shout out. Just means we do lots of stuff like this. And I run a user group in Bristol where like-minded people come to talk about Salesforce, which is cool, I suppose. And I'm joined by my colleague, Edith.
Mi nombre es Edith Valencia, yo soy mexicana y trabajo en Bristol en la misma empresa de Simon. Tengo más o menos un año que estoy trabajando con la tecnología de Salesforce, pero soy desarrolladora de Java, entonces tengo como más experiencia en ese sentido. Bueno, aquí estamos para ayudarles.
Cool. So most importantly, she's Spanish. So any questions? And then I'll just look smart. Okay, so let's quickly run through. I gave you a little idea there, but this is what we're sort of doing today, and here are some of the key things that hopefully you lot have got in your mind. So we're going to be looking at the Salesforce user interface, and we're going to be doing some development, hopefully. So I hope you're all comfortable with the setup menu in the developer console, and a little bit of basic programming, because that's what we're doing. If not, then don't worry, you can probably still sit this out and learn some stuff, but really this is a dev session, so we're hoping that you got a little bit of that down to take the most away from this. To actually build it, you'll need a developer edition. If you've got one, that's cool. If not, and you actually want to do it on your laptop, just put your hand up straight away when we get into the work. I've got like 20 set up with passwords, and we can just get you logged straight in, so you haven't got to go through the whole email stuff if you want to. Those of you that haven't got laptops, just follow along on the screen, right, and we'll have fun. So we're in the introduction. I'm going to explain the application to you in a second. Then hopefully we'll get half an hour out of the rest of the time to do this. And me and Edith will then just walk among you and answer your questions and help you out. Or actually, I think what we'll do, because of the low laptops, I might stay up front and click through very slowly on the process. But if you have questions, just ask us, and then hopefully we'll see, I don't know, like 20 new components all made today, which will be a really neat output as the result of this session. We're building it from scratch. This Lightning component will go on the contact page. What happens is when you load your contact page, the component makes a call out to a web service called the Internet Chuck Norris database. And then it gets the result from that to call out and puts it on the page. So this is just a little bit of a joke thing, and I'll show you the joke in a minute, but you can imagine the real usefulness for this for like a credit score request, or if you wanted to make an application check. When you load that contact page, it could call out to a credit service and show a green light or a red light. You could do really serious things with exactly the same component, but we're just going to show a joke because jokes are funny. This all works in Salesforce Classic for reasons that I explained in the workbook, and I'll discuss. But obviously it works in LEX as well, but there were some time delay factors in building this in LEX. As we know, Lightning is actually slow, and you can't do it in half an hour. So we do it in Classic where it works off of that. So, does everybody know what a Chuck Norris quote is? Can you chuck your hand up if you know what the Chuck Norris jokes are? No one knows what the Chuck Norris jokes are. Oh, wow. Do you know who Chuck Norris is? Yeah? The actor, right? So, in 2011, an internet sort of joke started up of making statements about Chuck Norris that were just ridiculously funny. So, an example would be Chuck Norris as an example. Chuck Norris played Russian roulette with a fully loaded gun and won. So they're all, jokes about how he's immortal, or he can beat science or physics or religion. Chuck Norris recently shaved his beard because at age 73 he's nearing a midlife crisis. And iTunes plays Chuck Norris 99 cents every time he listens to a song. So I'm only going to do 4. They told me I couldn't spend an hour just going over these things, so we'll have to move on. It all comes from this web service called the Internet Chuck Norris Database. And what we do with this application, we send the contact name, you see, to the web service, and then they'll reply with the contact name in the context of that joke, so that's where the fun comes in. However, I gotta say this, I've been told, some of the jokes obviously are a little bit inappropriate. We haven't got any children in here, so that's okay. There is some swearing, and there is, because the jokes are kind of open source, some really nasty people have written some really gross jokes. But there is a flag that we set in the code to exclude those. But if you get the code wrong and you accidentally get a bad joke back, I apologise, but just refresh and move on, and don't be offended by the internet. There's too much. But yeah, so there might be some bad language or some inappropriate jokes if you're unlucky, but we should be safe. So the actual application we're going to build, this here kind of represents a Lightning component. If you're familiar at all with the structure, the component part over here comprises of a front end, which is some HTML basically. We then have 2 JavaScript classes that back that up, called a handler and a controller, and that makes our component. What we do here to make it a bit more interesting is we actually then use some Apex in an Apex controller, and we call that from our component, because you can't make web service callouts from components, because JavaScript runs in the browser can't call a web service, you'll get cross-domain security issues and all sorts. So you have to come back to Salesforce, ask Salesforce to talk to the internet, and then get it back again. So that's why this is a bit more interesting than just putting an image on a page. And obviously, because we're good developers, there is a test class, which is in the code. So once we've got a component, we wrap that in a Lightning app. In this case, we just have one component in one app. It seems a bit silly, but in the real world, you could have many, many components in an app, and that makes more sense logically. But here we just have one. We then take our Lightning app, and we're going to put it in a Visualforce page. And this is the bit that makes it work in Classic. If we were in LEX, we could just put that straight in the Lightning app builder on the page. But it takes ages to appear, so we can't. We use a Visualforce page, and then we dump that into our page layout, just like that. Is this familiar? I'm trying to go quickly so we can start doing it, but this is all covered in the workbook as well. And then when it's there on the page, and you load up a contact, you get one of these quotes over on the right-hand side. So Jack Rogers can unit test entire applications with a single assert. I actually know some developers that do that, so maybe that's not so cool, but and that's what we're hoping for. So on your contact page, this is a Lightning component, and it's doing some cool stuff, and then you can take that away and make it do even cooler stuff. I think we've got another one, because I do like putting them in. No one has ever paired programmed with Jack Rogers and lived to tell about it. I also know some developers like that, so that's probably all true. I think that whips us through now. Yeah, so, okay. Does everyone get the premise of what we're doing? That's a yes, that's fine. Okay. So what I'll do, me and Edith will pass out these. You can keep these, because I'm not flying them all the way back to England again. They're heavy. If anything, recycle them at least. And yes, this will, hopefully, there you go. I should have taken more, shouldn't I? Can you give us another challenge? So I'll invite you at this time, because this normally happens when I do this. If anyone thinks that workbook is enough and they want to pop up to the pub now for half an hour, then don't sit there and just think this is rubbish now because you don't understand it or you don't want to do it. Then you can go. I won't feel bad. But otherwise, we'll crack on. Those of you with laptops, are you going to give it a go? That's a yes. Yeah, this is it. What a crowd.
The other issue is the internet connection.
Yeah, tell me about it. We were sweating this morning, and then the power went too, so that's good. Oh, actually, Okay, right. Well, what I'll do, and yeah, I can see some of you on laptops. I hope the internet works for you and you can actually do it, because I want to see some fist pumping when you make your first Lightning component. But for the rest of you in the room, I got a workbook too, so we'll sort of all go through it together. But I kind of got everything loaded up because I already did this. It's a bit like here's one I made 6 months ago, or last week. But yeah, we'll just go through it page by page real quick then, and we can all see what the process is, and then you can do it at home. So the first thing that we do is we need to make the component bundle. So if you follow on the screen, you can see we'd go up to File. Oh, come on. No, the internet isn't playing ball, is it? Go on. New, and then Lightning component. That makes one of these bundle areas over on the right-hand side here. And if you click on the first thing, it gives us our component, which is the front end there, the markup. So if you look on the very front page of the workbook, there's a GitHub as well. So you can all go over and literally just snap the code straight out of there. If you have a look then, as it says in the workbook under CMP, has this little bit of code here. So by putting that into there, we get what makes up the front of our component. We have some attributes, which are basically variables that hold information the component's interested in. We have a handler here, which is part of the event framework that you'll find in Lightning components. And in this case, we have just one event which says when this is initialized, call a method, and that's what makes our call out. And then the magic of this really is this UI output text, which has nothing in it when the page is loaded, because of course it's waiting for the joke to come back. So once we have the component, we put behind it some JavaScript, which again is in GitHub. I think it's in the JavaScript controller. So only one line really, although it's broken over 3, because all we really do in the controller is delegate the functionality to either the helper or to other services. It's just for orchestration. Try not to do too much business logic in the controller. So we call a method called retrieveQuote, and we're passing in the first name and the second name, which you can see here we get from these attributes. We default to Chuck Norris, but when we get to the Visualforce page later, you'll see how we inject those from the contact. So this just calls a retrieveQuote, and if you then look at the next page, you'll see we make the helper, which is the next one down in the bundle. We're just working our way down this right-hand side here, effectively. And this is where the more heavy JavaScript goes, which is this chunk here. This is a very common piece of work that you'll notice you do a lot. We're basically just calling a method from Apex, and you do the same thing to call any method from Apex over and over again. No doubt in about 2 releases, Salesforce will find a way to make this just one line of JavaScript, but for now we have these. First we tell it what the method's called in the controller, which is the C, and I called it getChucked. And we pass in 2 parameters, the first name and the second name, which we got in. We then tell it what to do when we get the quote back. And so in this case, we're saying on the component, we want to set the quote, which if you recall over on the front, was this piece here. So that was the magic, if you remember. We set that to what comes back from Apex, so that will be our joke. And then this last line here just puts it into the event queue, and then when things get in there, the component will just slowly roll through its actions, and it happens. And it all happens very, very quickly, normally. So that's the helper. And that really is the front bit of the component. If I nip back to the diagrams, what we've just done, we've got this then, the component, the handler and the controller, that quickly, and it was only, 10 lines of code so far, so that's very efficient. Now we get to the even more complicated bit, and this is where really, it shows why this is still a developer task, because we have our Apex controller. So if you look in the Apex controller page, we provision this work here. Let's get rid of that. There we go. We define 2 inner class structures, and this is what the response from the Internet Chuck Norris database looks like, and we pass those in here, you see, when we deserialize the response. And then we have our method, which is getChucked. We have to put this @Aura enabled on it, which exposes it to Lightning components. This is a common bug. If you don't put that, then it can't be seen not the test class. Over here. So that exposes the method to Aura. And again, you can see the first name and second name parameters are being passed in, and that has to match up to these here. So we're calling getChucked with those things there, not the test class. And then we just make a standard Apex, the same as we've always done whenever we're writing callouts in our code to our endpoint, which is the Chuck Norris, and you can see it also takes the first name, last name, and limit2 equals nerdy is what saves us from getting all those bad jokes with nasty adult words in. And once we do that, we call that out, sends it off. Deserializing, this again is standard Apex. We just take that response and puts it into these structures. You could obviously do this with deserialize untyped or something, and you just get a map, but it's a little bit easier to navigate the structure if we do that, because then we can just say sort of the response value joke. We'll drill down into the response, and then it will pass back just that string. That's all we're passing back is the string with the person's name in, and that's our Apex class, which is pretty easy. So where do we get to? That's the Apex controller. So we turn the page again. Right, and now we're going to put that all together into a Lightning app. And again, this is just one line actually, and in fact we don't need the one line. This is now optional. It used to have it. A Lightning app would crash if it tried to use a thing that wasn't declared as a dependency, but now you can just get away with, but you put it in there for efficiency. So you just say this app uses Lightning out. That's what allows us to put it on a Visualforce page, and it just has our component in it. Again, a more complicated app might have multiple parts, but this is a very simple example. So that's cool and easy. And then we want to put that onto a Visualforce page. So here's our Visualforce page. Again, it's very small, so these are all little bits of code. I don't think anything here has been really crazy and scary. And again, this whole section here actually is totally standard. It's just using the Lightning library to render our application. So we have to do include Lightning here. We provide a div, which we give an ID. And then the lightning.use takes the name of an application, and then what to do when it successfully loads, which is create our component. We pass in the first and last name from the contact, and that's how that gets all the way through to the Apex controller. We tell it where we want to put it in our Visualforce page, so again you could have multiple components in your page and assign them to different areas in the DOM. And then this is a callback, and we don't have anything to do here. Normally you would do a little success or error, you could log a failure or something like that, but we haven't. And again, this is very standard. You will do this over and over again if you want to include Lightning components in Visualforce pages. And it will drum it up. So, and the last important bit, I suppose, is we've used the standard controller here for contact, because it's that will allow us to put it on the page layout. So that is all of the code now. That's everything we need, and I'll show you how we get that to appear then. In our org, let's just go through and actually see it. So, our old faithful setup menu, I went into contacts and page layouts. Yeah. We can take the standard page layout for the contact, and because that Visualforce page used the standard controller, I've just remembered the Wi-Fi. This was brave, wasn't it? We'll see in Visualforce pages we have our component, and I've just literally put it on the page there. And I think again in the notes it says that comes up quite big. Use the spanner to set the size. To 100. I said 75. And let's not make a change. And we can save that away. And then that means when we load a contact, over here, our Lightning component, code runs faster when John Bond watches it. So there's our full life cycle. In fact, I've gone through that so fast. We're going to be out of stuff to talk about in a minute. But and that's it. It's working. It's a Lightning component. That is your first one. You could use that to build a credit score system, which is something I've actually done, which is why I keep using it as an example. But there are many things you can go out and request to get that to appear there. So what I'll do now. We'll skip the testing bit in the thing, but let's see if we can make this work in AliX. Actually, can we? It might be tricky. So we're going to set up. Actually, out of interest, is anybody on a laptop getting through it, or have you all just given up watch the screen? Are you doing it, or are you just checking emails?
Yeah.
You building it? Okay, is it working?
Yeah, not yet.
No yet? Okay, cool. Okay.
Sí, excuse me, just one
Yep.
question. It's about Aura enable.
Yeah.
If when Aura enable is called, an API call is spent or not?
No, it all happens inside the platform. So yeah, there are no API
Okay.
consumptions or
So we
anything.
can call us.
Yeah, many. The only interesting thing about the OR enable methods is they can be quite slow. So what we tend to do in our components when we write them very complicated, we normally make one OR enable method that we call from our component, and then we try to do everything in one OR enable method and maybe return a custom type. So you can return like a class of your own, or custom objects or lists or maps. So try and do it all in one go and return all the information. Because if you have many callouts from here, if you have many of these, each one can take 2 or 3 seconds, and you'll be waiting for the page. I think we have one component that needed 5 things, and it took 20 seconds to load, and we noticed it was the OR enabled is blocking as well, so it waits. It's synchronous. So we just put them all into one and returned a much bigger object at the end of them.
So maybe any kind of spinner or something.
Yeah, and we've done a lot of spinners. Yeah, we've done a lot of spinners. We have a folder full of different coloured spinners now.
So, I have a question there. At the beginning, you say that magic happens in the component.
Yep.
Where the v dot receives the value from the developer. We always should use v dot something else, or we can write anything.
Yes, it will always be V. I'll cover that off for you, and I can give you some tips as well. In the component, V stands for the view.
Yeah.
So that is things that are on the page. So v.quote means that this is something that's on the page, the element on the page. And the C dot namespace means in the controller. So, and you have to use those. If you put a V there, then it would break, and if you put a Q here, a C here, it wouldn't work. So that's how we then know that this is getting something from the view, so it tells it where to look.
Sure.
The interesting thing then is that the C dot namespace for methods is the same for the JavaScript controller and the Apex controller. So you can see when I request my Apex method, I'm still using C.getChucked, and it's actually going over though to get this OR enabled method. So I think part of what the OR enabled annotation does is it puts this method in the registry. So that raises an interesting thing, because in Apex I couldn't have another method called getChucked. The compiler would say this already exists, and you would get a problem. But you could put a method in here called getChucked, and then they would both exist, C.getChucked in JavaScript and C.getChucked in Apex. And when you try to call it, I'm trying to do a shadow, when you call it, it goes to the JavaScript one first. So it will try the JavaScript controller first, then the Apex controller, and you'll find yourself wondering for hours why something like this doesn't work, until you realize that you have getChucked also, say in here. So we follow a pattern generally that we use retrieve. So anything in JavaScript is called retrieve, so retrieve quote. And then when we go back to the Apex, we use the standard get, because get set is more of a pattern in Apex. So I would recommend you adopt a similar paradigm so that you don't make those mistakes. Honestly, it will give you no error message whatsoever, because the method exists, it will call it, and it just won't do anything. But it won't fail either, normally. So that's quite confusing. Yeah.
Do you have some tips in order to debug some statement or any JavaScript tool or something in order to avoid logging in the console?
Hours and hours of stuff. Tips for debugging components. I mean, obviously, console.log, to get that out, you do a lot of that. That happens a lot. What you may not realise is that down here, and I have to point really close to it, down here, right, you might think that's just a blue bit of Salesforce. It will print error messages down in the last line of the DOM. They kind of just fall there, they fall out of the page. So every now and then, you'll notice someone developing a Lightning component, something goes wrong, and they scroll down to here. I wonder if I can generate one. I think actually if I do just break that, so that doesn't exist anymore, if we load our page, and everything actually is working, we shouldn't get a quote now from Chuck Norris. But we didn't get Noah down there either, that's a shame. But you'll notice Lightning component developers scrolling down all the time, and you'll think they've gone mad. Oh, we've got an error up here instead. So yeah, okay, sometimes yes, this sort of error will appear just down in the bottom corner, so always have a look down there. I mean, debugging it, the messages normally aren't very useful. I mean, I guess that one is actually, you know, a true quote is not a function, you can go find that. Oh, wait. Was that a 5-minute warning? Or no? Other questions?
No.
Okay, you're just waiting. Yeah, I mean, Edith, do you have any other debugging tips?
I mean, bueno, supongo que conoce la debug console, que bueno, esa cuando utilizan los métodos de Apex, the debug console for Apex methods, that sometimes we apply, for example, aquí estamos utilizando un web service que puede ser que la falla esté de ese lado porque no obtenemos ninguna respuesta. Entonces en la debug console pues podemos inclusive ver todo el árbol de llamadas, the tree, the stack tree in the console that we also sometimes get.
In the browser console?
In the, yeah. You can, pueden poner breakpoints, inclusive también en la debug console. Y pueden ver todas las variables los valores de las variables que han tenido hasta ese momento también. Pero en sí, por ejemplo, no es que personalmente no creo que Salesforce es muy bueno para JavaScript, la verdad. I don't think Salesforce is too good for JavaScript debugging.
No, it's really not. It's a really hard thing to debug these components at the moment. They don't throw many Apex errors because sometimes the breakdown is between Apex and the component, so you just get success logs with nothing in. I mean, if you look, that's 1.1 kilobytes. So the whole Apex log for that is that, pretty much. So that's still going to tell you if anything went wrong in your component. And that would be the log from when it... Oh, yes, of course it didn't make the call because I broke it, so yeah. But that, see, it didn't work, and that's all the log we got. Which is useless. Yeah, there aren't many other logs. Console.log really is your best friend. Yeah. Does anyone else have any questions from the workbook or from any of it? We're happy to answer them. We've got like another 10 minutes and then we'll all get out for lunch. Would anyone like to see the test class that I wrote for the Apex? Or, I mean, that's kind of off topic, so that's just really testing Apex. No? Show we see? Okay. So because it's a web service, we have to use the Apex mock service, HTTP callout mock. So we have one test class with one test method because it's quite simple. But before we can run that, we have to create a fake response from the Chuck Norris service because we won't really call it in our test because that doesn't happen. So we make a fake never mock Chuck service which implements this interface. You have to give it one method which is called respond, and then basically it just returns what you would want the Chuck Norris thing to return. So I build up just one of our little objects and I just put the word JV, I just put the word joke, the joke is MS Dynamics, clever. So that will come back. And then in our actual test method, the only thing that runs is we just call that one method from our Chuck controller to get chucked. If you remember, it was really simple. It just takes the first name and the last name. When this runs now, Salesforce will intercept the HTTP request and it will use this instead. So then all we have to do is assert that we got our joke back, which was this string here, and that will cover it off. So that's a really nice, tidy way to test web services. What you can do is you can use this request parameter to pass in a different value. So in the request, you can actually set, if I set the first name to be, correct in this one, and we could then say, if the name is correct here, return a joke. If I then did a different test and I sent in a different first name with fail, in here I could put in, literally just before that return, put if name equals fail, return a different response, and then I could check different things that are happening inside my web service. But for the sake of this exercise, this was enough. Gets us 100% coverage. Right, we'll get out of Skype. Doink. And gets us our coverage and asserts our behavior, so that's fine. So you could actually take this Chuck Norris component and deploy it to production with the information in this workbook. I don't advise you do. I don't think many of your clients will want the jokes appearing on their pages. And it's broken too. And also, if you do look at the back of the book, the LEX bit then. So the reason we don't do this in Lightning, in like a short session like this, is because in order to use Lightning, you have to enable my domain, or the domain, is it called my domain? Yeah, my domain in Salesforce. Pick yourself a namespace, and that tends to take about 10 minutes to actually appear. It says you'll get an email when it's working, if you're familiar with my domain. But sometimes even when you get the email, it doesn't actually work straight off the bat, so people can just be sat waiting, trying to get it working. But yeah, you have to fill that in to switch over to Lightning. And then also, even when you build the Lightning component and you go into Lightning App Builder, you create the component, you create the thing. Sometimes it appears immediately and you can just drag it straight in, but then sometimes it can take an hour for the actual component to appear in your custom components over on this side over here. Because what would normally happen, and what will happen, might just be upset. Yeah, I can't do it because I haven't got my domain. On the left-hand side, you get a list of your components and you can just drag them into the page, but they just don't appear there. And you log out, you can log in, they don't appear there. You go and have a cup of coffee, come back, and suddenly it's there. But again, in a workshop like this, we can't be sat waiting. But it's that easy to make this work in LEX as well. You just have to be willing to wait, because Lightning's not quite lightning fast. But yeah, you can take that away. I'd be really excited to know if you actually do get and do this at home. Dig Edith and I up and give us a tweet, and let us know if it works or not, because I always like to know and get feedback on whether the component was useful, whether the workbook makes sense in Spanish, which I don't know. But I think we're probably creeping up to time. I can see people going for lunch, so let's not let them beat us. Thanks guys, I hope that's useful.
Thanks to you.